In the quiet corners of her memory, the music box was more than just an object. It was the heart of her family's story, a keepsake passed from her grandmother's hands to her mother's and finally to her own. Its intricate carvings of roses and vines, etched delicately into the dark mahogany, spoke of a time when craftsmanship was a language of love, and every detail told a story. Inside, a porcelain ballerina twirled to the tune of a hauntingly beautiful melody, one that seemed to echo the unspoken words of generations long past. Her grandmother, a stern yet loving woman who had survived war, famine, and the loss of her husband, had often said the music box carried the resilience of their family, a tangible reminder of their ability to endure life's greatest trials. As a child, she would sit cross-legged on the faded living room rug, watching in awe as her grandmother wound the delicate key, the melody filling the air like a protective shield against the world outside. To her young heart, the music box was magical. It turned ordinary days into treasured memories, its music weaving a sense of safety and warmth that felt eternal. When her grandmother passed away, the music box became a bridge between the past and the present, a link to a world where Sunday dinners were sacred and the scent of lavender always lingered in the house. Her mother, though less outwardly sentimental, treasured it too, often playing its melody when life felt too overwhelming, as if the music could calm the storms both outside and within. But life has a way of unraveling even the strongest threads, and as the years went by, the music box's importance faded in the bustle of adulthood. It wasn't until she found herself in the throes of financial desperation that the heirloom resurfaced in her mind, not as a cherished relic, but as a potential lifeline. Struggling to keep the lights on and feed her young daughter after an unexpected layoff, she wandered into the attic one evening. Her hands trembling, she opened the trunk where the music box lay nestled in a worn quilt. Its familiar scent, a mix of aged wood and lavender sachets, hit her like a wave, pulling her back to a time when her grandmother's laugh echoed through the house and her mother's reassuring hand rested on her shoulder. Holding the music box, she felt a pang of guilt, as though her grandmother's spirit were watching, silently questioning the decision she was about to make. But desperation has a way of silencing even the loudest doubts, and with a heavy heart, she wrapped the heirloom in a soft cloth and carried it to the small antique shop at the end of the street. The shopkeeper, an older man with kind eyes, admired the music box's craftsmanship, remarking that such pieces were rare treasures. She wanted to tell him that it was more than rare. It was irreplaceable, a piece of her family's soul. But the words stuck in her throat, and instead she nodded, accepting the modest sum he offered with a forced smile. Walking out of the shop, she told herself it was just a thing, an object that couldn't possibly hold the weight of her family's history. But deep down, she knew she had let go of something far more significant than wood and metal. As the years passed, she learned to live with the absence of the music box, though the memories it carried would surface unexpectedly, at the sound of a similar melody, or when she saw a ballerina figurine in a store window. She told herself that survival had demanded sacrifices, and that the music box was simply one of many. But late at night, when the house was silent, she would replay its melody in her mind, each note a painful reminder of the life she had once known and the legacy she had failed to protect. Her daughter grew up, oblivious to the weight her mother carried, and life moved on, as it always does. Yet, in her quiet moments, she couldn't help but wonder where the music box had gone, whose hands had touched it, whose ears had heard its melody, and whether it still carried the echoes of her family's love and resilience. She thought of the Sunday mornings spent watching her grandmother bake bread, the music box's melody mingling with the sound of the oven timer and the rustle of newspapers. Those memories felt like a dream now, hazy and unreachable, as though they belonged to someone else's life. The regret of parting with the music box grew heavier with time, not because of its monetary value, but because of what it represented, a connection to a past she could never reclaim. She would occasionally pass by the antique shop where she had sold it, peering through the window in the faint hope that it might still be there, waiting for her. But the shopkeeper had retired, and the store was now a cafe. its walls adorned with abstract art and overpriced coffee menus. The finality of that change felt like a nail in the coffin of her hope, a reminder that some losses are permanent, no matter how much we yearn to reverse them. And yet, a part of her refused to let go completely. She held on to the belief that the music box, like the memories it carried, was out there somewhere, perhaps still weaving its magic in someone else's life. It was a comforting thought, though it did little to ease the ache in her heart. The absence of the music box became an unspoken presence in her life, a silent shadow that followed her through every milestone, every heartache, and every fleeting moment of joy. At first, she tried to convince herself that letting it go was a practical decision, a necessary sacrifice to keep her family afloat during a time of desperation. But as the years stretched on, practicality gave way to a gnawing sense of loss, a feeling that something irreplaceable had slipped through her fingers. It wasn't just the music box itself she mourned. It was the connection it represented, a tether to her past and the people who had shaped her into the woman she was. Her grandmother's voice, once so vivid in her mind, began to fade, replaced by fragments of phrases and fleeting glimpses of her smile, like photographs left too long in the sun. The melody of the music box, which she had once been able to hum effortlessly, became a patchwork of forgotten notes, a tune she could almost remember but never quite grasped. As her daughter grew older and life moved forward, she buried the ache of the music box beneath the demands of daily life. There were school lunches to pack, bills to pay, and endless cycles of work and rest that left little room for dwelling on the past. Yet, the smallest triggers could unravel her composure. A child's laughter echoing in a park, the scent of lavender drifting from a neighbor's garden, or a snatch of music that bore a faint resemblance to the box's haunting tune. These moments would hit her like a wave, leaving her breathless and teary-eyed, grasping at memories that felt as fragile as smoke. Her daughter would occasionally ask about her own childhood, and each time the woman would recount stories of her grandmother and the warmth of those Sunday mornings. But when her daughter inevitably asked about the music box, she would brush off the topic, saying it had been misplaced long ago. She couldn't bring herself to admit the truth that she had sold a piece of their family's heart to a stranger for a handful of bills. Her daughter's growing independence brought with it a new kind of loneliness, one that seemed to amplify the void left by the music box. The once bustling house grew quieter, the echoes of laughter replaced by the hum of an empty refrigerator and the occasional creak of floorboards. In the stillness of these moments, she found herself drawn to the attic, where remnants of her past lay scattered like forgotten relics of a bygone era. She would sit on the floor, sifting through old photo albums and letters, searching for anything that could fill the void left by the music box. But nothing ever came close. The photos, though cherished, were static. The letters, though heartfelt, lacked the living, breathing presence that the music box had once provided. It wasn't just a keepsake, it was a piece of her family's soul, a vessel for memories and emotions that no photograph or letter could capture. Over time, she began to wonder if the music box had found a new home, if it was bringing comfort and joy to another family the way it once had for hers. The thought was both comforting and heartbreaking. She liked to imagine a little girl, much like her younger self, winding the key and watching the porcelain ballerina twirl, her face alight with wonder. But the comfort of that fantasy was always short-lived, eclipsed by the sharp pang of knowing it wasn't her daughter, her family, who held that piece of their history. On particularly difficult days, she would visit the antique shops in town, wandering through aisles of forgotten treasures in the faint hope that she might stumble across the music box. Each visit ended the same, with her leaving empty-handed and feeling the weight of her loss all over again. As the years turned into decades, her guilt began to take on a different shape. It was no longer just about the music box. It was about everything it represented, the choices she had made, the sacrifices she had endured, and the connections she had failed to preserve. She began to see the music box as a metaphor for her own life, a beautiful and intricate thing that had been passed down through generations, only to be discarded when the world demanded more than she could give. The parallels were inescapable, and they forced her to confront truths about herself that she had long avoided. She began to ask herself difficult questions. Had she been a good steward of her family's legacy? Had she done enough to honor the sacrifices of those who came before her? And most hauntingly, would her daughter one day look back on her own life and feel the same sense of loss? These questions lingered in her mind, shaping her thoughts and actions in ways she didn't fully understand. She found herself becoming more protective of the few family heirlooms she still had, treating them with a reverence that bordered on obsession. She began to talk more openly about her grandmother and mother, sharing stories that she had once kept to herself. And though she still avoided the topic of the music box, its absence seemed to color every conversation, an unspoken reminder of what had been lost. Her daughter, now grown with children of her own, began to notice the change. "You've been talking a lot about the past lately," she said one evening, her voice gentle but probing. "Is everything okay?" The woman nodded, forcing a smile as she assured her daughter that she was simply feeling nostalgic. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She was searching for a way to make peace with her past, to reconcile the choices she had made with the person she wanted to be. In the quiet of her home, she began to write letters to her grandmother and mother, pouring out her regrets and gratitude in equal measure. She wrote about the music box, about the memories it carried and the ache of its absence, as though confessing her feelings to them might somehow lessen the weight on her heart. The letters became a kind of therapy, a way to process the tangled web of emotions that had grown around the music box over the years. And though she never intended to send them anywhere, they brought her a sense of closure she hadn't felt in decades. But even as she tried to move forward, the music box remained a lingering question mark in her life, a mystery she couldn't solve, a wound that refused to heal. She didn't know it yet, but the story of the music box was far from over, and its next chapter would begin with an unexpected knock at her door. It was an ordinary afternoon when the knock came at her door, breaking the quiet rhythm of her day. She had been sitting by the window, sipping tea and watching the golden hues of autumn leaves swirling in the breeze, a fleeting moment of peace in her otherwise uneventful routine. The sound startled her, its sharpness cutting through the stillness like an unwelcome guest. Visitors were rare these days. Her daughter and grandchildren lived hours away, and most neighbors preferred text messages to face-to-face interaction. Curious and slightly apprehensive, she rose from her chair and made her way to the door, her steps slow and deliberate, as though bracing herself for the unexpected. When she opened it, no one was there, only a small, weathered package resting on the welcome mat, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a fraying string that looked as though it had traveled through time itself. She hesitated, her heart quickening as she bent down to pick it up. The package was surprisingly light, yet there was a weight to it that she couldn't explain, as though it carried more than its physical contents. Her name was scrawled on the front in a script she didn't recognize, elegant yet unpolished, like the handwriting of someone who had learned to write with care but little practice. There was no return address, no postmark, no indication of where it had come from or who had sent it. She glanced down the street, searching for any sign of a delivery person or a passerby who might have left it, but the neighborhood was eerily still, the only movement coming from the leaves tumbling across the pavement. Carrying the package inside, she set it on the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as she untied the string. The paper crinkled under her fingers, releasing a faint scent of something familiar yet elusive, a mix of aged wood and lavender, so faint that she wondered if she was imagining it. When she peeled back the last layer of wrapping, her breath caught in her throat. There it was, the music box she had given away all those years ago, looking almost exactly as she remembered it. The dark mahogany gleamed faintly under the kitchen light, its intricate carvings of roses and vines still as exquisite as ever, though they bore the faintest signs of wear. Her hands hovered over it, unsure whether to touch it, as if afraid it might vanish if she did. Finally, with a mix of reverence and disbelief, She lifted the lid. The melody began to play instantly, the familiar tune unfurling into the room like a long-lost friend returning home. Tears sprang to her eyes as the notes washed over her, each one tugging at a memory buried deep within her soul. She sat down heavily in the nearest chair, clutching the music box as though it might anchor her to the moment. For a long while, she simply listened, letting the music fill the silence that had so often weighed her down. When the melody ended, she noticed something tucked inside the box, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and frayed at the edges. She unfolded it carefully, her hands still trembling, and read the words written in that same unfamiliar script. Every journey has a way back home. The words sent a shiver down her spine, their meaning both profound and puzzling. Who had sent this to her? How had the music box found its way back after all these years? The note offered no answers, only deepened the mystery. She turned the box over in her hands, examining it for any clues, but there was nothing. No markings, no signatures, nothing to indicate who had gone to such lengths to return it to her. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could it have been the shopkeeper? But he would have no way of knowing her address after so much time had passed. Perhaps someone had discovered it in an antique store and recognized it, but how would they have known it belonged to her? As the hours passed, she found herself oscillating between joy and unease. The music box's return felt like a miracle, yet the circumstances surrounding it were unsettling, almost surreal. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something hidden beneath the surface waiting to be uncovered. That night, she placed the music box on her bedside table, its presence both comforting and haunting. She fell asleep to the faint scent of lavender and the lingering echo of its melody, her dreams a patchwork of memories and questions that refused to be answered. In the days that followed, the music box became the center of her world. She played its melody every morning, letting it fill her home with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Yet, the mystery of its return gnawed at her. She found herself drawn to the note, reading and rereading the words as though they might reveal some hidden meaning. Every journey has a way back home. The phrase felt deeply personal, as though it were speaking directly to her, yet its author remained a mystery. She thought of calling her daughter to share the news, but something held her back, a strange, unshakable feeling that this was a story she needed to unravel on her own. One afternoon, as she dusted the music box, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a faint engraving on the underside, nearly invisible unless the light hit it just right. It was a set of initials, EL. The sight of them sent a jolt through her, though she couldn't place why. The initials didn't match her grandmother's, her mother's, or her own. Who was EL, and what connection did they have to the music box? The discovery reignited her determination to uncover the truth, to trace the music box's journey, and find out who had sent it back to her. Little did she know, the answers she sought would take her on a journey she could never have anticipated, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her family, her past, and herself. Determined to uncover the mystery surrounding the music box, she embarked on a journey to trace its path through the years, a journey that would take her deeper into her family's history and further into her own memories than she had ever dared to go. The initials L etched on the underside of the box became her first clue, a breadcrumb leading her into a labyrinth of questions. Who was EL, and what role had they played in the music box's long and winding journey back to her? Armed with nothing more than the music box, the cryptic note, and her unshakable resolve, she began her search by revisiting the small antique shop where she had sold it all those years ago. The shop was gone, replaced by a sleek cafe with exposed brick walls and minimalist decor. She stood outside for a moment, the weight of time pressing heavily on her chest, before stepping inside. The air was filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, a far cry from the musty, comforting aroma of the old shop. She approached the counter and asked the barista if they knew anything about the previous owner, describing the elderly shopkeeper with the kind eyes. The baristas shook their head but mentioned that the building's landlord might have records of past tenants. With a flicker of hope, she jotted down the landlord's contact information and left, clutching her handbag tightly as though it might slip away along with her determination. The landlord, an affable man in his 70s, remembered the shopkeeper well. "Mr. Langley," he said, nodding as he sipped his tea. He retired about 15 years ago, but he was always meticulous about his records. I might still have a box of his paperwork in storage. Days later, she found herself sifting through dusty files in the landlord's garage, her heart racing each time she came across a receipt or ledger bearing the name of the music box. Finally, she found it, a receipt dated the week she had sold it, documenting its sale to a woman named Evelyn Lark, with an address in a neighboring town. Hill. The initials sent a shiver down her spine. Who was Evelyn Lark, and why had she purchased the music box? More importantly, what had she done with it? Her next step took her to the address listed on the receipt, a charming cottage with ivy creeping up its stone walls. She knocked on the door, half expecting no answer, but an elderly woman opened it, her eyes sharp and inquisitive. "Evelyn Lark," she asked, her voice trembling. The woman nodded, her expression cautious but kind. "Yes, and you are." She introduced herself and explained her connection to the music box, her words tumbling out in a rush. Evelyn's face softened as she listened, her eyes flickering with recognition when she described the box's melody. "I remember it well," Evelyn said, gesturing for her to come inside. "Please sit. There's much to tell." Over tea, Evelyn recounted how she had stumbled upon the music box at the antique shop, drawn to it by an inexplicable feeling of familiarity. She had purchased it on a whim, thinking it might make a thoughtful gift for her granddaughter. But as the days turned into weeks, she found herself unable to part with it. "It was as if it had a story to tell," Evelyn said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "I played it often, and it brought me a strange sense of comfort, though I didn't know why." When her granddaughter came to visit, Evelyn decided to gift her the music box after all, believing it would be cherished in young hands. She adored it, Evelyn said, her smile bittersweet. But life took her away from us too soon. The room fell silent as Evelyn's words hung in the air, heavy with grief and unspoken memories. It turned out that Evelyn's granddaughter, a young woman named Lila, had passed away in a car accident, leaving the music box to be packed away with her belongings. "I couldn't bear to look at it after that," Evelyn admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "So I gave it to a charity auction, hoping it might find a new home where it could bring joy again." Her heart ached for Evelyn's loss, but the story only deepened the mystery. How had the music box traveled from a charity auction to her doorstep? And who had left it there? Before leaving, Evelyn handed her a small envelope. "This came with the music box when I purchased it," she said. "I never paid it much attention, but perhaps it will mean something to you." Inside the envelope was a photograph of a young woman standing beside a well-dressed man, both of them smiling warmly at the camera. The back of the photograph was inscribed with a date and the initials H&E. Her breath caught as she recognized the woman in the photograph. It was her grandmother, decades younger, with a man she didn't recognize. Who was he, and what connection did he have to the music box? Her journey continued, each clue unraveling a new thread in the tapestry of the music box's history. She traced its path through the hands of collectors, gift givers, and strangers, each of whom had been touched by its presence in ways they couldn't fully explain. One man, a retired teacher, described how the music box had been a source of comfort during his wife's battle with illness. Another, a single mother, shared how its melody had soothed her crying baby on countless sleepless nights. Each story added a layer of meaning to the music box's journey, transforming it from a simple heirloom into a symbol of resilience, hope, and connection. As she pieced together the music box's history, she found herself reflecting on her own life in ways she hadn't expected. The guilt and regret she had carried for so many years began to shift, replaced by a growing understanding of the ripple effects of her choices. Yes, she had let go of the music box, but in doing so, she had set in motion a chain of events that had brought comfort and joy to countless others. The realization was both humbling and freeing, a reminder that even the smallest actions can have far-reaching consequences. And yet, the question remained, who had brought the music box back to her, and why? The answer, she knew, was waiting for her somewhere down the road, and she was determined to find it, no matter where the journey led. The trail of the music box led her to a quiet nursing home on the outskirts of a neighboring town, where the past seemed to linger in the air, mingling with the scent of polished wood and fresh linens. She had come here seeking answers, following the thread of stories that connected the music box to a man named Harold, a retired craftsman whose name she had discovered in the auction records. Harold, she was told, was the one who had purchased the music box from the charity auction Evelyn Lark had mentioned. As she entered the home, she felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension, unsure of what she might uncover, but driven by an unshakable need to understand the music box's journey. The receptionist directed her to a sunlit corner of the common room, where Harold sat in a wheelchair, his hands resting gently on the arms of the chair as he gazed out the window. His frame was thin, his hair a soft silver halo, but his eyes, when he turned to greet her, were sharp and alive with curiosity. She introduced herself and explained her connection to the music box, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. Harold's expression shifted from polite interest to something deeper, a flicker of recognition that made her heart skip a beat. "The music box," he murmured, his voice gravelly yet warm. "I always wondered if it would find its way back to where it belonged." She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You know about its journey?" she asked, her voice tinged with hope. Harold nodded slowly, his gaze distant as though he were sifting through memories. "I found it at the auction years ago," he began, his tone deliberate and reflective. "It wasn't the kind of thing I usually bought, but something about it drew me in. The carvings, the melody, it reminded me of my late wife Eleanor. She loved music boxes, and I thought it might bring me some comfort after she passed." Harold's voice wavered as he recounted how the music box had become a quiet companion in his solitude, its melody a balm for his grief. "It brought back memories of simpler times," he said, his eyes glistening. "Even though it wasn't ours, it felt like it carried a piece of her spirit, a connection to the love we shared." For years, the music box sat on his bedside table, its melody a constant in his life. But as Harold's health began to decline, he decided it was time to let go of the things he couldn't take with him. "I didn't want it to be just another object gathering dust," he explained. "I wanted it to bring someone else the same comfort it had brought me." Harold's decision to pass on the music box was not taken lightly. He had given it to a friend, a traveling musician named Clara, who had visited him often to play piano for the residents. She had a way of making people feel seen, heard, and understood, Harold said with a wistful smile. "I told her to keep the music box safe, to pass it on to someone who needed it more than she did." Clara, he explained, had taken the music box on her travels, using its melody to bring a sense of home to those who had none. "She said the music had a way of speaking to people," Harold said. "It wasn't just a tune. It was a story, a feeling, a connection." Her heart swelled as she listened to Harold's story, each detail adding another layer to the music box's journey. But one question burned in her mind. How had it found its way back to her? Harold tilted his head thoughtfully when she asked, his fingers tapping lightly on the arm of his chair. "Clara mentioned something once," he said slowly. "She said she met someone who seemed to know the box's history, someone who felt it belonged somewhere specific. I never got a name, but she said the person spoke about it with such reverence. It was like they were carrying a piece of its story in their heart." The mystery deepened, but Harold's story left her with a profound sense of gratitude. She thanked him for sharing his memories, her voice thick with emotion, and promised to honor the music box's legacy as it continued its journey. As she rose to leave, Harold reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "Whatever brought it back to you," he said, his gaze steady and kind, "remember this. It wasn't just chance. Things like this, they have a way of finding their way home when the time is right." Walking out of the nursing home, the weight of Harold's words settled over her like a warm blanket. She realized that the music box wasn't just a link to her own past. It was a vessel for the stories and emotions of everyone who had touched it, a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Yet the mystery of its return remained unsolved, and the initials H&D on the photograph nagged at the edges of her mind. Who was the man standing beside her grandmother, and what role had he played in the music box's history? That evening, as she sat by the fire with a music box in her lap, she replayed Harold's words in her mind. "Things like this, they have a way of finding their way home." The music box had been more than a possession to those who had cared for it. It had been a source of solace, a bridge between worlds, a thread that connected strangers across time and distance. And now it was hers again, not just as a relic of her family's past, but as a symbol of the unbreakable bonds that tied them together. But the journey wasn't over yet. There were still pieces of the puzzle missing, and she was determined to find them. The music box rested on her mantel now, a quiet sentinel over the home she had built, a home filled with echoes of laughter and silence, triumphs and regrets. It had been weeks since it returned to her doorstep, but its presence felt as though it had always been there, an unspoken reminder of what had been lost and what had been found. As she reflected on the stories she had uncovered about its journey, she began to see the music box in a new light, not just as a family heirloom, but as a testament to the endurance of love, memory, and connection. Yet, the lingering questions haunted her still. Who had ensured its return? And what did the initials H&E on the photograph mean? Her days were filled with quiet contemplation, the kind of introspection that comes with age and the realization that life's biggest questions often remain unanswered. She thought often of Harold, of Evelyn, and of the countless lives the music box had touched. It had become a thread weaving through the tapestry of their stories, connecting strangers in ways none of them could have imagined. Each person had been both a guardian and a beneficiary, finding solace in its melody before passing it along, like a torch carried through the darkness. She wondered if the music box had been waiting all this time to return to her, or if its journey had been guided by forces beyond her understanding. One afternoon, as she played the melody for what must have been the 100th time, a realization struck her. The music box's absence had shaped her life as much as its return. Losing it had taught her the value of what truly mattered: family, love, and the intangible bonds that connect us across time and space. At the time, she had viewed its sale as a failure, a symbol of her desperation and inability to hold on to her family's legacy. But now she saw it differently. The music box had not been lost. It had been shared, its melody offering comfort and hope to those who needed it most. She began to wonder if its journey had been necessary, not just for her, but for everyone who had encountered it along the way. This realization brought her both comfort and guilt. Comfort in knowing that the music box had continued to carry the spirit of her family even in her absence, and guilt in acknowledging how long she had clung to her regret. She thought of her grandmother, who had always believed in the importance of resilience and the power of letting go when the moment called for it. Sometimes, her grandmother had once said, "We have to trust that what we've given away will find its way back to us when we're ready for it." The words, long buried in her memory, resurfaced now with a clarity that left her breathless. Was this what her grandmother had meant? That the music box's journey was part of a larger plan, one she couldn't have understood at the time? Her thoughts turned to her own daughter, now a mother herself. She wondered if her daughter would one day face the same struggles, the same sense of loss and longing that had defined so much of her own life. The music box had been a bridge between her and her ancestors, But what kind of bridge had she built for her own child? These questions gnawed at her, and she resolved to talk to her daughter, to share the stories she had uncovered and the lessons she had learned. Perhaps the music box's journey wasn't just about her own healing, but about ensuring that her family's legacy would continue to inspire and connect future generations. When her daughter visited the following weekend, she brought out the music box and the photograph, her hand steady despite the whirlwind of emotions churning within her. Her daughter listened intently as she recounted the music box's journey, her eyes wide with wonder and her expression soft with understanding. "I had no idea," her daughter said, her voice tinged with awe. "All these years, I thought it was just a story you told to make Sunday mornings feel special." They sat together for hours, poring over the photograph and speculating about the identity of the man beside her grandmother. Her daughter suggested they dig deeper, perhaps even consult a historian or genealogist to uncover the full story. The conversation left her feeling lighter, as though a weight she had carried for decades had finally begun to lift. For the first time, she felt at peace with the music box's journey, its losses and gains, its absences and returns. She realized that life was much the same, a series of exchanges, of giving and receiving, of holding on and letting go. The music box was no longer just an object. It was a reflection of her own journey, a symbol of the beauty and complexity of human connection. Yet, as much as she had come to accept the music box's journey, she couldn't shake the feeling that its return wasn't just a coincidence. There was still a mystery to unravel, and she was determined to see it through. That evening, as she placed the music box back on the mantel, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a faint inscription hidden within the carvings, almost imperceptible in the dim light. It was a single word poem. Her breath caught as the pieces of the puzzle began to shift, each one hinting at a larger truth she had yet to uncover. The music box had returned, but its story was far from over. There was more to learn, more to understand, and she knew that the answers would challenge her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of stillness, letting the music box's melody fill the room as she closed her eyes and smiled. Its journey had brought her to this moment, and she was ready for whatever came next. The inscription on the music box, "Home," was a revelation that reignited her determination to uncover the truth. It was no coincidence, she thought, that the music box carried such a message, one that seemed to echo her grandmother's words about finding one's way back. But what did it mean? And who had returned it to her doorstep? These questions consumed her thoughts, and as the days passed, she felt an increasing urgency to resolve the mystery. The answer, she suspected, lay in the photograph she had found with Evelyn Lark, a photograph of her grandmother standing beside an unknown man, their faces alight with a joy that seemed almost tangible. The initials H&E on the back of the photo offered her only clue, but the significance of those letters remained elusive. Determined to find answers, she took the photograph to her local library, where an archivist helped her search for records that might shed light on her grandmother's past. After hours of combing through census data, marriage licenses, and old newspaper clippings, they stumbled upon an article from the 1940s featuring a photograph of the same man for her grandmother's picture. The article identified him as Henry Ellis, a local craftsman known for his intricate woodworking and his contributions to the community during the war effort. The archivist's face lit up with recognition. "Henry Ellis was famous around here," she explained. "He made custom furniture and heirloom pieces, many of which are still treasured by families today." Her pulse quickened as she realized the connection. Could Henry Ellis have been the one who crafted the music box? And if so, what was his relationship to her grandmother? The archivist helped her dig deeper, uncovering a series of love letters exchanged between Henry and a woman named Edith, a name that matched her grandmother's. The letters, preserved in a local historical society's collection, told a story of a tender yet complicated romance, one that had been cut short when Henry was drafted into the war. In one of the final letters, Henry described a music box he was working on, a gift he intended to give Edith as a symbol of their love. "It's not just a box," he wrote. "It's a promise, a way for us to always find our way back to each other, no matter where life takes us." Her hands trembled as she read the letters, each word a window into a chapter of her grandmother's life she had never known. The revelation was overwhelming. Her grandmother, the steadfast matriarch who had always seemed so unshakable, had carried a love story in her heart that she had never shared. The music box, it seemed, was more than a family heirloom. It was the physical manifestation of a love that had endured across decades, even as life and circumstance had separated its creators. The realization left her both awed and heartbroken. She couldn't help but wonder why her grandmother had never spoken of Henry Ellis or their connection. Was it too painful? Or had she simply chosen to let the past remain in the past? With the archivist's help, she traced Henry's later years, discovering that he had returned from the war and settled in the same town where she had lived as a child. He had never married, instead dedicating his life to his craft and to helping others. The archivist mentioned that many of his creations bore the same inscription as the music box home. It was his signature, a way of imbuing his work with a sense of belonging and connection. He believed that home wasn't just a place, the archivist said. It was a feeling, a bond between people. His work was his way of creating that bond. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, but one question remained. How had the music box found its way back to her? The archivist suggested she visit Henry's workshop, which had been preserved as part of a local museum. When she arrived, she was struck by the care and attention that had gone into preserving his legacy. The workshop was a time capsule, filled with the tools and materials Henry had used to create his masterpieces. Among the exhibits was a journal, its pages filled with sketches, measurements, and notes about his projects. As she flipped through it, she found an entry dated just a few weeks before Henry's death. It described the music box in detail, noting its carvings, its melody, and its intended purpose, to find its way home to Edith's family. Her breath caught as she realized the depth of Henry's love and devotion. Even in his final days, he had been thinking of her grandmother and the family they might have had. But the most shocking revelation came when she turned to the final page of the journal. There, in Henry's handwriting, was a name she recognized immediately, Evelyn Lark. He had written to her, entrusting her with the task of ensuring the music box reached its rightful place. "If you ever find Edith's descendants," the note read, "tell them this box was made with love, and it carries the promise that love never truly fades." Tears streamed down her face as the truth sank in. Evelyn Lark, the woman who had purchased the music box at the antique shop, had known all along where it belonged. She must have discovered its significance after Henry's death and had spent years trying to find its rightful owner. The cryptic note that had accompanied the music box now made perfect sense. Every journey has a way back home. It wasn't just a message, it was a promise fulfilled. But the twist didn't end there. As she prepared to leave the workshop, the museum curator handed her an envelope, explaining that it had been left by an anonymous donor who had contributed to preserving Henry's legacy. Inside was another letter, written in the same handwriting as the note that had accompanied the music box. The letter revealed that the donor had been tracking the music box's journey for years, ensuring it passed through the hands of those who needed it most before finally returning to her. The donor's name was not listed, but the letter ended with a line that sent shivers down her spine. "Love has its own way of finding us, even when we think it's lost." The music box had returned to her, but not by chance. It had been guided by love, her grandmother's, Henry's, and perhaps even something greater. The realization was profound, a reminder that the bonds we share with others endure far beyond the limits of time and space. She left the workshop feeling a sense of closure she had never thought possible, though the mystery of the anonymous donor lingered in her mind. Whoever they were, they had given her the greatest gift of all, the chance to reconnect with her family's past and to carry its legacy forward. The music box sat quietly on her mantel, its delicate carvings illuminated by the soft glow of the evening sun filtering through the curtains. She had spent weeks piecing together its story, uncovering the hidden chapters of her grandmother's life, and in doing so, she had rediscovered parts of herself she hadn't realized were lost. The revelation of Henry Ellis's love for her grandmother had been both heartwarming and heartbreaking, a testament to the enduring power of love and the choices that define our lives. And yet, the mystery of the anonymous donor who had orchestrated the music box's return lingered like a soft whisper in the back of her mind, begging for resolution. One evening, as she was winding the music box to play its familiar melody, there came another knock at the door. Her heart skipped, a strange mix of anticipation and unease flooding her chest as she rose to answer it. Standing on her porch was a young woman, no older than her own granddaughter, clutching a folder in her hands and wearing an expression that was equal parts nervous and determined. "I hope I'm not intruding," the woman said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Claire, and I think I might have answers about the music box." She invited Claire in, her curiosity overriding her apprehension, and they sat together in the cozy warmth of her living room. The young woman explained that she was the great-niece of Evelyn Lark, who had passed away just months earlier. In sorting through Evelyn's belongings, Claire had discovered a collection of letters and notes detailing the music box's journey. "My great-aunt spent years trying to find your family," Claire said, opening the folder to reveal pages of correspondence, sketches, and even photographs of the music box in its various homes. She believed the music box was more than just an object. She called it a bridge, a way of connecting people, even across time. As Claire spoke, she produced one final letter, written by Evelyn shortly before her death. The letter was addressed to her, the name carefully penned in Evelyn's delicate handwriting. She unfolded the letter with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the words that seemed to leap off the page. Evelyn wrote about her promise to Henry Ellis, her discovery of the music box's significance, and her unwavering belief that it was destined to return to its rightful place. "I couldn't find you in my lifetime," Evelyn wrote, "but I hope this letter finds you now. The music box belongs to your family, but its journey was never just about possession. It was about connection, about love enduring in the most unexpected ways." The words brought tears to her eyes, a mix of gratitude and sorrow welling up inside her. Evelyn's dedication, Henry's love, and the countless lives touched by the music box had created a story that was far greater than she could have ever imagined. She looked at Claire, whose face mirrored her own emotions, and felt an overwhelming sense of kinship. "Your great-aunt was a remarkable woman," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't thank you enough for bringing this to me." Claire smiled, her nervousness replaced by a quiet confidence. Evelyn always said that the music box wasn't just meant to be kept, it was meant to be shared. "I think she'd be happy knowing it's finally home." But the question of what to do with the music box now lingered heavily in her mind. It had been returned to her, its journey complete, but she couldn't shake the feeling that its story wasn't finished. As much as she cherished its presence, she realized that the music box's true value wasn't in its possession. It was in the connections it created, the lives it touched, and the memories it carried. She thought of her own grandchildren, who would one day inherit the stories she had uncovered, and wondered if they would see the music box as she did, not just as an object, but as a living piece of their family's legacy. After Claire left, she spent hours sitting with the music box, its melody weaving through the quiet of the night. She thought of her grandmother and Henry, of Evelyn and Harold, of all the people who had been part of its journey. Each one had added their own chapter to its story, creating a tapestry of love, loss, and resilience that transcended time. And then she made her decision. The music box, she realized, wasn't meant to stay in one place forever. It was meant to keep moving, to continue connecting people, to carry its melody into new homes and new hearts. The next morning, she wrote a letter, carefully tucking it inside the music box alongside the photograph of her grandmother and Henry. In the letter, she recounted the music box's history, its significance, and the lessons she had learned from its journey. "This music box," she wrote, "is a reminder that love and connection endure even in the face of loss. It is a bridge between past and present, a thread that binds us to one another. Its story doesn't end here. It continues with you." She placed the music box in a sturdy box, wrapped it carefully, and tied it with a ribbon. Then, with a heart full of gratitude and a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years, she delivered it to a local charity auction, ensuring that its next journey would begin anew. As she walked away, she felt a bittersweet ache, but also a profound sense of fulfillment. The music box had found its way home to her, and now it was her turn to let it go, trusting that it would continue to bring comfort and connection to others. Weeks later, she received a letter from the auctioneer, thanking her for her generous donation. The music box had been purchased by a young family who had written to express their gratitude. They described how its melody had already become a beloved part of their home, soothing their newborn to sleep and filling their evenings with a sense of peace. The letter ended with a simple but powerful line: "Thank you for sharing this gift. It feels like it was always meant to find us." She smiled as she read the letter, her heart swelling with joy. The music box's journey was far from over, and she took comfort in knowing that its story would continue, its melody weaving through the lives of others just as it had through hers. The music box had taught her a lesson she would carry for the rest of her days. That love, in all its forms, is a journey, one that never truly ends.